Hiya, so I really wanted to do a video about picking and pickitudes. It's a massive subject. First thing I would say is that my approach is pretty holistic. I don't tend to think of picking as being separate from any other part of my playing. So um, I'm not necessarily a technique head, although I think I do a pretty good technique. And this is in response to a comment somebody asked about, what would you say about picking etudes. So I'm going to do this video and then one about left-hand technique. It's also going to be a little bit philosophical and a bit rambly, so if you're one of those people who periodically posts on my videos to say, oh, it's far too much talking, this probably isn't something you want to be watching. But if you are interested in my thoughts, then I hope this is of interest and help. Okay, so such a huge subject. Right, the thing about picking is I think for a lot of guitarists, the kind of advice you get on picking is usually like, okay, on this note you do a downstroke, on this note you do an upstroke. And then you have these terms like economy picking where, you do each new string is in the same direction as the last pick stroke, sweep picking where you go up and down like that, alternate picking where it's all strict up and down, that kind of stuff. This to me is a very simplistic way of looking at technique. And the problem with it is that, for instance, if you use kind of what has been my default technique for a long time, which is this thing, right? Look at the angle of the pick there. It's gypsy rest stroke picking. You could burn. I'll just make sure you can see that on the camera. Yeah. So you could burn hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice time and never be able to alternate pick well with that pick stance. It's actually easier to do consecutive downstrokes on an arpeggio like that than it is to alternate pick it. That's just the way it is. And the reason why is because in order to do an upstroke on the next string, you have to dig into the plane of the strings like that. It's just very awkward. Like, again, I can't do an up sweep. Plenty of down sweeps, no problem. That's no problem. But to do this, I have to actually rotate my hand like that and go like that, right? And then you got the up sweep. So it's like literally impossible for me to alternate pick and economy pick with my pick in this position. What I do use with my pick in this position is what you might call traditional gypsy jazz rest stroke picking, which is heavily downstroke based. Basically, if you see a guitarist with their pick in this position, that's the kind of picking technique they're going to be using. And a lot of the traditional guys, Joe Pass, I think Barney Kessel, although somebody was having it out with me in the comments section, but Tal Farlow, same. I see those guys as using this kind of pick technique, just like Django did, and Wes has his own variant, because, to upsweep with the thumb, you've got to crook it like that, or, and as a result, you listen to their playing, you hear lots of upsweeps, lots of upsweeps, and arpeggios ascending, rather than, the alternative, the opposite. Now, if you listen to Peter Bernstein, who plays like this, his playing is full of, I can't do it very well, but it's full of like, that's a bit better, full of like upswept arpeggios like that, or, like much more elaborate things than that. So when he plays an arpeggio, it tends to be going that way, or downwards in pitch, upwards physically on the guitar. And that's just, that's the way his technique works. It is one of the quirks of his playing and one of the things that makes him sound like him. So, and then there's loads of there's lots of people who economy pick both ways. That's very common now. Jimmy Rainey is probably one of the, and Chuck Wayne as well, two guitarists who, were very much two-way players like that early on, and we've had their students and students of their students like Pasquale Grasso and Ben Monder and people like that who've, Adam Rogers, Kurt Rosewinkle, blah, blah, blah. All these guys use two-way economy picking, Mike Marino, it's very common now. Okay, and actually if your hand is in a straighter position like this, it's a lot easier to alternate pick. So in terms of my own journey, which was like, I started off picking like this, self-taught, was actually able to get a lot of chops this way. And actually, I'm quite glad that I was self-taught, because I think like a lot of players who are taught, if they're taught to pick properly, which I think for some people seems to be floating pick, alternate picking, with a floating hand like this, very difficult. It can be done well, but I feel like I came up with a solution which worked for me. And then, about 8 years back, I swapped into gypsy, had to learn how to gypsy pick because of the sorts of gigs I was playing. And I found, that took me a couple of years to get that together. I was still, reverting to the other technique for electric gigs. And then more recently, I've been kind of experimenting with all kinds of stuff. So you'll see me in different videos using different techniques. For instance, this technique here, that I use a lot these days, is much easier. I find it much easier to alternate pick and do upward sweeps and so on and so forth with my hand like that than like this. But then there's loads of different variants. So my pick technique is kind of eclectic, and it's hard for me to say there's one way that I do it. If anybody has a technique which is definitely not there yet, then I would advise picking like this. So I kind of go for a downstroke heavy gypsy jazz style approach, because I think that's very good for traditional picking technique. But then I could change. I think this is you can teach somebody to pick this way, and it will support them. It's a good way to go, but it's not the only way to go. So my ideas about that are constantly in flux. But I would say, think about the way you're holding the pick, and don't be too sort of dogmatic about what's right and wrong, because the thing is, your teacher could be a great player, and they might be a very traditional approach player, but the very existence of quite extremely weird techniques like Pat Metheny or Peter Bernstein, or Kurt Rosenwinkel or George Benson. George Benson, there's a school of Benson pickers now, but George Benson's technique is quite distinctive at the time. I don't know if there were many people playing like that. Maybe there were. I've seen a couple of people who are rough contemporaries of George's. But whereas in any of these techniques, they're all quite unusual, and it seems to me to be daft to sort of say that's wrong. If somebody's making music on that level, it seems to be manifest that their technique is good if they can do so. Some players have problems, with health, and they need to rework their technique. But if they can make it work, then there's something to be learned from that, even if you don't, learn that technique. So I think technical study is really about looking at the way people use their bodies to play the instrument, and sort of being a little observant and experimenting with things and seeing what works best for you. Okay, that's not necessarily terribly helpful. If you're interested in knowing my thoughts about rest stroke picking, you can always head over to my other channel, which is Learn Gypsy Jazz and Swing Guitar. I think that's what I called it. I'll link below, which has some tutorials on gypsy breaststroke picking, and you can sort of get other materials online about that. There's quite a big community worldwide for gypsy jazz, and there's a lot of information on that picking style, and it's a great way to pick. Christian van Hemert, he has videos as well. So my thoughts on picking etudes is that the music that we play, for instance Donna Lee, you're not going to find a picking technique that's more of a pain in the bum than that. Or anthropology. Oh yeah, Moose the Mooch. Depending on which version you play. But that's difficult, And whether you play that with sweeps, or whether you try alternate pick it, or whether you just ghost those notes, whatever your approach is, there's something to be learned from that. So my advice would be to extract something from the music and work on it, something that you find difficult, localize it, turn it into an exercise, just loop it round and round, play it slowly, experiment with different ways to do it. Be physically intuitive, because your body will say, oh yeah, that feels good, if it's a good thing to do, and if it feels awkward and difficult, don't do it. I know that seems like probably a little bit not hardcore enough perhaps for some people, feel like the instrument has to be dominated and the physical body has to be dominated and they have to push through this thing. But if you like my playing and you think that I can play, I've always gone with what feels natural and what feels right. And I think most players who have a healthy technique have gone with that. You know, it's just like, it's not difficult for me to do that, you know? It's not hard at all. Just, you know, it's just easy for me, okay? And that's because I have that movement is like dead easy, you know, or that movement. Or if the movement isn't easy to make, then you're not going to be able to do it at speed. As simple as that. The other thing is, like, right hand technique doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have to combine it with left hand technique. And in general, like, as I say, I'm very holistic, you know. If I play Don Lee again. You know, I use a mixture of, picking and slurs. Because to me that sounds more, more kind of interesting to listen to, and more phrased, and more legato, and more beautiful. There's particular rules about how to do that, so it sounds jazzy, quotes, but, or it sounds like jazz phrasing, I should say. But, I think, like, most of the players that I really like use a combination between right hand and left hand, and I tend not to go for really picky players so much. There's some really honourable exceptions, like Pat Martino, who I think picks pretty much every note and just, sounds awesome. But Pat Martino is kind of a very specific thing. But, there's no rights and wrongs. It's like you have to practice consistently. It's also like making variations. You shouldn't practice like technical practice, like any other kind of practice, should never be like mindless and just like crank the handle 10,000 times and I'll be able to do this. If you're not able to do it like within the space of a week, it's probably not going to happen for you. It's like it's taking something simple and specific and then working out the biomechanics of it. It's not like setting a metronome at 60 beats a minute and then making it slowly faster and faster, because if you do that, you will hit a wall. It's like learning, like if you're fast playing, it's literally just that movement, economy picking. I know there's no limit on that movement. If you're alternate picking, whatever. Obviously, alternate picking is much more difficult, or if you just, whatever it is, whatever your movement is, if that isn't easy to do and easily repeatable, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many times you practice it. It's not gonna make you any faster. So it really is about being physically intuitive, and Troy Grady, for instance, goes into the science of it a lot more. But I kind of feel like, there's so much you can do just by being observant and open to the way people play and watching their hands and watching the way they use their bodies to play. And you can learn a lot from that, even if you don't end up copying their style or whatever. So that's my advice on technique, really. Obviously, if you are a personal student of mine, I will be able to look at your technique and I'll be able to advise you. Part of the problem is it's very hard for me to give any general advice on technique based on just, this is good practice, this is bad practice, because it doesn't work like that. Like, I need to see the person in a room, see what they're doing with their hands, see how I could tweak it to improve it if it's basically sound, or maybe rebuild it from the ground up if it's never going to work. I really don't feel like there's simple yes or no answers with this. So, and I think it's a lot more fun if you just sort of explore different things, and if I have any chops or any technical ability in the instrument, it's because I think I've always followed that mindset, and I would recommend other people to do the same. Anyway, hope that's interesting and helpful. Thanks for watching. You can post lots of comments about how I'm completely wrong and messing people up below, and I look forward to seeing those and debating with you. Thank you. Bye.